everybody, for another episode of The Carrot and the Stick. I am your favorite root vegetable, Garrett, and we have no stick with us today. Our beloved pointy object, Keith, is traveling, and in his stead, we have a special guest, Paul Swain from Yuma, otherwise known as Swamination on Discord. If you guys are perusing around the Bittensor Discord, Paul is a really good friend of mine. We've known each other for a long time, pretty much my entire adult life, actually. We've had many adventures in business and tech, and now we work together in Bittensor, just in different camps, I suppose. So, Paul, welcome to the pod. Do you want to introduce yourself? Thank you. Do you want to introduce yourself and just give everyone an idea of kind of who you are, what your role in Bittensor broadly has been, and then kind of what you do at Yuma?
Yeah. So I'm Paul Swain. You know me as Swamination out in the community, and I'm a friend of everyone. I just want to see Bittensor succeed. Most recently, I've joined Yuma. I'm the chief protocol officer there. I'm kind of the glue between Yuma and the ecosystem. So I interface with various aspects in the eco, community calls, subnet support, validator support. We have an asset management team, and I talk with them. I kind of help Yuma understand the changes that are coming from the protocol, and then also just represent Yuma in the space as well. Before that, I was working directly with OpenTensor as CIO alongside you as CTO. And my role there was with the infrastructure team and helping run the OpenTensor validator.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it was quite an adventure at OTF, and it's just kind of cool to see us having similar roles, just in different organizations. I'm the head of protocol at Tao.com in my kind of daily capacity, and so Paul and I still work really closely together. And I thought it'd be great to bring you, Paul, onto this podcast and just chit chat on Bittensor and kind of where things are at with the protocol, where things are at with Bittensor on a more macro level. Yuma just released a State of Bittensor document, Volume 2. And there's a lot of content in there. Is there anything
it's chock full.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to highlight and just tell the world about that you wanted to mention specifically?
Well, yeah, I don't know, we could take a lot of time just covering that, here, but I definitely recommend everyone go check it out. We can talk about that, towards the end, but I would say at a high level, it's important to understand what Yuma does, in the Bittensor ecosystem. We have a mining team, we have a validator that, does hardware validation on all the subnets, or really close to all the subnets. And then we have our Yuma asset management team, and then we have a subnet accelerator. So we try to bring subnets to the ecosystem. Yeah, and so we're constantly trying to bring people to come see Bittensor and what's going on, and we're trying to help businesses launch and utilize Bittensor to its best. So that's kind of the crux of the report is hey, we're in these areas. Here's what we're seeing. Right. So it's got a little bit of everything in there. For example, I was talking about the subnet accelerator. We've got, 14 plus, subnets, that we're accelerating right now. I don't remember the exact count off the top of my head, but it's, quite a few, but we're just trying to say hey, how do we help these teams learn to use Bittensor best? How do we support them as they're going through launching a subnet, dealing with the tokenomics, working with miners, working with incentive mechanisms. There's a bunch of things in running a subnet that we can help with, and we can bring some expertise to bear in there. So definitely in the State of Bittensor report, definitely check out the subnets that we're working with. It's really interesting to see because one of our main goals, I think, across the ecosystem, and hopefully the report makes this evident. We're trying to reduce friction and these technical and operational barriers. So we're just trying to lower the bar to get in and access Bittensor. And so some of these things are really high level, hard to understand. And so the State of Bittensor report is kind of a snapshot that says, here's kind of some details about what the tokenomics mean. Here's some subnets and what they do. Here's how it affects the everyday person. Here's how it affects maybe investors. So it's a really interesting report that's got a wealth of data and work behind it.
Yeah, and I would stand by that if you guys are interested in kind of, the State of Bittensor, it's a really good document to take a look at. There's something in it for everybody. There's like the investor side, the asset management side. There's also the subnet building side. Yuma is backing how many subnets now?
Yeah, I think
15?
it's 14 or 15. I have to look at the latest number. Subnet 105 being just launched. That's one of our latest ones. So it's incrementing the number in my head. It's 14 or 15 right now, I think.
Yeah, yeah, very cool, very cool. Um, I think that building subnets is something that is evolving and shifting and changing a lot. And to see Yuma backing so many subnet teams, and some of which have been really successful, it's definitely worth paying attention to. I mean, you have Score, which is one of the top subnets that you guys have backed. There's Yanez. There's a number of different ones. Yeah, like, can you give some insight on like Yuma's perception on like subnets as when it comes to support, like what kind of projects do you guys like to support, or like how do you drive forward your mission of bringing people into Bittensor through the subnet angle? I'd just be curious to know more about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, in like a traditional business, you're looking for somebody who's going to change the world, right? You're like, what problem are you solving, right? But we're also interested in like, what problem can you solve with Bittensor? Like, how can we bring this world-changing technology into a world-changing space and do something of value to it? That's the beauty of Bittensor, right? Is like we're creating intelligence, we're creating value with compute, and so we're really looking at teams where we can be like, hey, how can we take this kind of plug and play decentralized access to infrastructure and to intelligence, map it to what you're doing, and then 10x your effort, right? Or solve a really, really difficult problem that would be hard to do without that. So we're really focused on the traditional business aspects of due diligence, of just like, what's your team's background, what's your expertise and your passion in this area. But we do really heavily look at that, what they're trying to accomplish, and be like, how can Bittensor accelerate that? And then we'll have active discussions. And not everybody who comes to Yuma, sees that mapping or finds the value in that for the particular problem they're solving, but many do. And they're like, oh, that's really interesting. I tell people all the time, like, what would you do if you had 200 plus engineers working on your problem? If people go, what? Because that amount of resourcing as a number is important, but then also when you go, well, that also is a competitive market. So these people are competing with each other to solve your problem, and it's an incentivized market of intelligence and talent. And we start to kind of discuss around that, and people go, yeah, this is how we could solve our problem if we had that kind of mass expertise, attacking the problem and proving it through the validators. So it's really interesting. That's kind of interesting. Some of it's traditional and then very Bittensor focused, of like, how do we really do something where Bittensor can really be exercised?
Yeah, I think that you guys coming in from that investor angle is actually really healthy for this ecosystem, because I think some of the earlier subnets that came along were people that were insiders into the ecosystem. They were miners, they were, you name it. And they see this opportunity to build a subnet. They build a subnet, and maybe it's a cool project, but then they think, oh, dang, I have a subnet. Now I got to build a product. Now I got to build a company.
Right.
Now I got to build something around this to keep this thing afloat, especially in the world of DTAO, where you have to constantly garner interest in your subnet in order to keep that price stable. And so when you're looking at subnets and you're thinking, yes, there's a Bittensor angle to this, but there's also a kind of traditional investor angle to this of like, is this a viable team? Is this a viable end goal or project or product? Is this something that is worthwhile investing? You start to think about this as not just an ecosystem of a bunch of nerdy projects, but as an ecosystem of startup companies. And I think that's really needed in the ecosystem. I think that helps mature the ecosystem, where you have builders that are building not for the sake of building, but they're building for the sake of some end goal, which is really what all startup companies do, is they solve problems. And what problems are the subnets going to be solving? And if we have a driving force that is, using the investor hat as a method of bringing people to that kind of maturity of building subnets is great, but building subnets got to solve a problem. I think that's really healthy for the ecosystem. And the investment side is, I know, one angle of many that Yuma is taking on, but I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think you hit it nail on the head earlier too when you were talking about DTAO was like a major maturity step, like in the ecosystem. And it wasn't that the ecosystem was immature before. Obviously, we've done a lot of steps to create services and even harden some of the stuff that we've already got in the eco.
Yeah.
But before DTAO, there was a lot of talk about, hey, you really need to be product first. Even from the foundation itself, or like, what problem are you solving in the world? And people will try to bring a technology to it, but not necessarily understand the product side of it. And we were saying, hey, like the next generation of the chain is going to be really severe on like, hey, you really need to know what your product is. What are you mapping in the world? What problem? This isn't just a tech experiment. It's like, how do we go and produce value, which is the purpose of the chain. And when DTAO hit, it was really the beginning of that hard measure of saying, hey, you really have to perform that. And it's been really challenging. And then the second version of that now has come out as TaoFlow, which is very much like, hey, we need to show that the interest in the ecosystem is really focused on the things that are providing real world value, that they're providing benefit to the token holders, is providing benefit to a product in the outside world. And it's really, we've watched over time, pre-DTAO, I said, look, when DTAO comes out, we could see as many as half the subnets, die on the vine if they don't know how to communicate their products, help people understand their roadmaps and what they're accomplishing. And since DTAO, we've just seen that ramp up massively as the talent of these teams to be able to come out and communicate well. But they also rely on other teams. Like something that Yuma does in our accelerator is we really work with teams to help with communications and say, oh, that thing that you're doing, that'd be great to post on X and celebrate. Here's your roadmap and how are you achieving it? And many subnets have been like great at doing that. But really, yeah, I agree. DTAO really pushed on that. And TaoFlow was another kind of form of that really drove, hey, Tao shouldn't be, I think to quote Const, Tao shouldn't be sequestered in places that aren't providing value. Tao should really go into places that are really providing value to the world and to the network. Yeah, totally agree.
I'm glad you brought up TaoFlow because that is something that's really pivotal. I mean, it changed the game where it's not just about just support a price at any cost, including if that means there's no activity on your subnet, but instead it really just means like, hey, if the chain is going to be providing support either by deepening liquidity or by with chain buybacks actually subsidizing your subnet, you've got to demonstrate that there's attention being drawn towards your subnet, and that really reduces the amount of exploitation that can happen there, but also changes the strategy where now public attention, public interest is kind of front and center for a subnet, which is pretty unique for an early stage startup company. I think it affects the investment game quite a bit, but I think it, like further in your document, you guys have shown, like with your own asset management and whatnot, that you're proving that subnets are investable assets,
Yes.
which is actually a really important hypothesis to prove because there's been a lot of volatility with, the crypto market in general lately, but also just since the start of DTAO, where people have made a lot of money, they've lost a lot of money. And I think that is kind of an open hypothesis that for a lot of people, it's not answered yet. And so with this document, it shows that like, hey, put the right minds together. These are very investable assets. And these are teams that you can back that have real world results. And I think when you have an investable asset that's either investable because it's a yield-based token with deep liquidity, or if it's a token that is rising at a sharp rate because it's just soaring through the ranks really fast. If you have a real project that is being expressed through that economic engine, then it becomes one of the most stable investments you can make in crypto because it's not exclusively based on the speculation of other investors and trying to
Right.
ride a hype train. It's saying this is a system that draws money out and funnels money back in via alpha buybacks and all kinds of mechanisms. And miners are actually contributing towards a project, and that is how the system runs. And so when you see actual outputs, I think that actually transforms subnets not into this scary new kind of almost L2-ish type trading. It becomes actually one of the most stable trades you can make in crypto.
Yeah, because there's like determinable value. I like how you were saying like that relational value. Sometimes it's subjective perception, right? And not even to say that all those things are bad, because there's lots of things we have. Even U.S. currency can be subjective in its value, depending on what's going on in the world. Stocks can do that too. But I think in this scenario where we're looking at 20, I think in the report it said 27% of the value of the network is being shown in subnets, right? Like as Tao moves into subnets, the subnets are showing that. They're actually showing, and it's a regular increase of value. Like people are perceiving that. And that's internal to the people who are maybe more in the know. And as this gets more out there in the world and people start to see that, they're like, oh, this investment is actually, Tao is like an index to AI companies doing real world value. It's not, I'm just hashing some algorithm to produce a coin, which maybe there's a space for that. The coin is automatically emitted and it's distributed to everyone that's competing for the token and that interest. But that value is generated by the miners, the GPU work and the CPU work that's done. All of those chips that are they're doing things, they're for the purpose of producing intelligence, not just hashing a value. And I think people are starting to realize that, both internal to the ecosystem, it's been focused to our DTAO and TaoFlow conversation, but also people in the outside world, even spending all this time trying to bring, institutional resources and access to the eco and expose this eco to the public to see this opportunity. And yes, it's really neat to see it growing like that.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue to talk about kind of the influx of attention that we've actually gotten in the Bittensor ecosystem
From all over.
recently. From all over, yeah. I think, what was it, CoinGecko reported that we were like the third most talked about token recently.
Yeah.
That's pretty incredible considering we're not even a top 10, top 20 token by market cap. But it just goes to show how much mind share there is in Bittensor. I think people are starting to realize like what the value of it is. It's not a meme coin. It's not some really vague speculation. It's a real economic engine that actually produces results. And one of those results that we're seeing now is this, within the last week, we saw Ridges produce their beta, their like agentic software engineering tool. And what's kind of neat is I've seen people on X and other places actually using that to mine other Bittensor subnets.
Oh yeah.
And that's kind of cool. I mean, I think that a lot of people have talked about using agents as a means of mining on Bittensor, and maybe Bittensor becomes this this loop where agents are actually using other agents to accomplish their tasks in a way that makes economic sense. Like the incentives are aligned. So it's not like, oh, I need to buy API keys for these 10 different services. It's like, I have my one agent, but my one agent might use the services of a subnet to get something done. That subnet might have in and of itself a series of miners that are both human and agentic based. And that actually aligns the economics to a point where, if as an individual, you can have maybe one agent, but you're getting the benefit of 10, 20, 100 agents, which is really interesting. And then there's also that wild idea of what happens when an agent decides that building a subnet is the best way to accomplish its goal.
Right.
And
I'm waiting for that. It's going to be great.
yeah. And maybe as a means of even getting human collaboration in that. If an agent is saying, hey, I need a human's eye on this, I need to create a competition to draw humans in. Keep in mind, a subnet is completely permissionless. It's anonymous. It has nothing to do with hiring people. There's no contractor agreement. There's no employment. There's none of that. So for an agent, that's super easy. It's like, oh, I can spin up a subnet as long as I've got the capital to front the subnet slot. I can do that, and it's completely permissionless. Who's to say that there isn't already an agent that's running a subnet? We don't know. And I think that's one of the other cool things about Bittensor is that it's scalable for this future where you're kind of building alongside AI in a very sci-fi sort of way. So like what do you think about this, Paul, of like this idea of agents mining on Bittensor, of people using agents to mine, of agents building subnets? Like where is that going to take Bittensor?
It's already happening, right? Like it's from both directions, because you're talking like externally being able to come in and like maybe automatically do subnets or consume some services. But many of the subnets, I wouldn't say most, but many of the subnets have already geared themselves towards agentic access. Bridges obviously being, their main mantra is like agentic access, but you can like single line your own like Pico Cloud shoots, right, and go run it. You can go do a sandbox thing on Templar and run an OpenClaw instance there. You have Targon and Liam doing private compute, and all these things are very accessible to automation. And so it's like, okay, I need to have storage. We've got Hippias. I need to have compute. We've got 4 subnets of different types to be able to do different types of compute that you want to do, complete with TEE, trusted execution environment, so you can actually have privacy, which is huge. You can completely decentralize it and scale it, up and out. With Beam just launching, you'd be able to do privatized network bandwidth completely over that same system. So there's all these ecos that we're going to be able to build where the infrastructure is completely decentralized, but completely available inside of Bittensor. You won't have to actually go out and consume an external service. It's already happening. There's several subnets. I was trying to remember while you were talking about it. I know Numinous, they were talking about using, I think, dsearch and shoots and Vericore inside the network to accomplish some of their goals, because it was better for them to do that. One, just subsidizing cost, but also they were just really effective at having results that were useful for them to achieve their goals, because they're kind of world model forecasting. So they need really, really relevant data sets. Well, how do they get that? Well, they get that through dsearch, which is doing some of that. And then, Vericore, they're doing the accountability, the AI, what do they call it? Credibility sourcing, I think is what they called it. But you're like, I need to get this data. I need it to be relevant. So it's interesting seeing these subnets start to go out and start to tie in with other subnets. It's creating its own, backbone infrastructure to be able to rely on. So it's very cool to watch, and it's moving very, very quickly.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like just amazing to watch happen. It is so fast. Like the rate at which we're seeing agents being brought into the subnet world, and also the integration of so many subnets in concert with each other to build a singular end product. I think that's actually one of the primary benefits of subnets, is when you have the economics aligned the way they are, a lot of things become a lot more feasible. And so you're like, okay, well, I'm going to buy a Mac Mini to host my OpenClaw or whatever. That's $600 out the window. And then you realize you actually don't need a Mac Mini to do that. You could just do that through a Bittensor subnet. You can do that through Basilica or through, any given number of infrastructure subnets. You can host for like next to nothing compared to buying a Mac Mini. And so now the feasibility of doing some more grandiose projects with agents and things like that becomes it just becomes that much more real when you're using 2, 3, 4 subnets all in concert with each other. And it all stacks, right? If you have agents mining a subnet, but then you're using an agent that uses that subnet, it all stacks up. And so that's why I thought the idea of I think it was Mark Jeffrey actually, who was even he was mining a subnet, and he was like, I'm going to use ridges to try to improve my miner. It's like, that's so cool.
Yeah, I read about another one that was doing kind of a neural architecture search for model types that would work on a particular problem, and it would behind the scenes just churn all night, figure out the best model, and then use that in a subnet to actually mine it. So it was churning on its own. It just did this search for the best model that it needed to use, and it didn't require human interaction to do it. And not to say that the human element needs to be completely removed, but there are some cases where let's just use the human talent to do the stuff that's less mundane, and focus the energy in the proper space so that value is created. And that's what Bittensor is really trying to do. How do we hone this? And it's not just Bittensor that's doing that. Obviously, we read all this stuff about Anthropic and the competition that all these large companies have, but they're very centralized in their focus, and they each have their individual biases. And I like in this environment, to your point, we can build ecosystems in this environment that could have 100 different focuses and biases or non-biases that people want to do, and nobody can control those things. And I love seeing these things being built.
Totally. And that's what's super cool about the synergy here, is that there's so much native Bittensor infrastructure, shoots and and Basilica and Targon, Liam, all these subnets that are infrastructure based. I think that they are going to be the platforms by which so many other subnets are going to find real success. Like the breakout subnets that are going to get a lot of widespread attention are going to be built using infrastructure from all these subnets, and I think that just is super exciting. Like I'm totally bullish on that that synergy, and we're already saying that like all over the place. Like I don't know if I would call it a hot take, but like my take is that infrastructure-based subnets aren't going to be the breakout subnet that's going to put Bittensor as like a household name, but I think that they are the prerequisite for that. Because once you bring infrastructure, like and align that to a way that it actually makes economic sense, where you can have a relatively small team, a relatively small subnet that can build something that it otherwise would never have the availability to do because of cloud costs, because of hardware costs, and all that kind of stuff. You're just giving superpowers to these teams that are building really, really, valuable products.
Well, and that value is recognized externally, right? Like, it's one thing to say like, oh, Bittensor does these things. I can like name them off, right? It's decentralized, it's open, it's permissionless, it scales upward and outward. We can say up, meaning like you can have more and more power as it becomes available, but you can also outward as how many do you need, right? Because that can just scale infinitely based on how much of the world wants to participate. But outside of the world, there's a lot of people that don't necessarily understand Bittensor, but they do understand cost effectiveness. They understand openness and privacy. And as we start to see these services that are coalescing, more notice is being taken of like, oh, of all the options I could take, this one's now available. Shoots has made itself available in this area. Ridges has made itself available in, this product that I already use. As people start to discover these things, those differences really start to make sense to people. They don't have to understand anything about Bittensor. The services are just becoming realized externally, which is fantastic.
And that's a good, actually, like pressure point for the subnet owners is that when you're getting value that's realized on the outside, like they care about results. They care about the end result, like how good is this service or product, and how cheap is it? Like how useful is it? These are the things that matter to the end users, and that drives the success of the subnet. Is that just like any other startup, you've got to conform to the needs of your customer base, however small or wide that is. If you're catering to a customer, you got to build for that, and that has been a North Star for a lot of the most successful subnets that we've seen. Is we see infrastructure costs driving down, trending towards zero. We see ridges actually beating Claude Opus models in benchmarking competitions. We're seeing
and in cost. Yeah,
exactly. And we're seeing all of the success. It's cheaper, it's more performant, it's more accurate, it's more fill in the blank. And that's driven by really competition that's now not just competition amongst the miners, it's competition amongst all of the incumbent solutions in the external world. And that's really where, like, that's the escape velocity that Bittensor is getting to. And we're starting to see that, like with the Ridges launch recently. We're seeing that with Shoots. We're seeing that with like all of these subnets that have been building sort of behind the scenes. I mean, they're kind of front and center for people like us, but from the external party, it's very behind the scenes. And even though it's a quasi publicly traded startup, kind of with the DTAO subnet market, it still feels very much like a stealth startup for a lot of these companies. I mean, Templar producing the largest decentralized training runs in the world by a long shot, and it's not even close. And not only do they produce the largest models that are decentralized, they produce them in less time than other competing projects.
Yeah, and they got Anthropic's attention recently, which was interesting.
Yeah. So I'm really excited for like what that means for Bittensor 2026 in terms of activity in the subnets. We're also seeing like this, like in this crypto bear market that we're in, we're seeing people that are like trying to find value in their crypto investments. Like what does any given token really mean, or what does it really represent? And I think people are starting to understand what Tau means and what Alpha means, and that when they're buying into that ecosystem, there is an active engine of intelligence and improvement and work that is being generated and created through that ecosystem in a way that you don't really get with other crypto projects. And I don't want to throw everybody else under the bus, but
Sure.
Bittensor is not speculation. Bittensor is results driven. It's competition driven.
Right.
And like it's a meritocracy. It's like if you perform better than somebody else, you get paid more, and that drives innovation naturally. It's like what you said earlier a few minutes ago, that like Bittensor is it is this economic infrastructure of intelligence being produced in innovation.
I come from a background of like 25 plus years of IT, and some machine learning stuff in a previous life for you and I. And I think that it's interesting to see this progression in the network where it just gets more and more enterprise skill like every day. It's amazing to watch what's being built, because like people don't always know like what is TEE, what does that mean? It's like, well, building a trusted execution environment is an incredibly complex effort that requires a lot of like service level agreements. You have like an SLA is like, can I rely on your service? And that's here in Bittensor, which is really awesome to see all the talent that's building things out like in very robust ways. I mean, people's businesses depend on these services, and they're building them out. These are not just science projects. Now, there are subnets that are more focused on early stage research things. They're utilizing Bittensor to grow those things, and maybe they're pre-product and they're working towards that. That's fine. But the ones who are like building these products now that are being purchased, really building them in a mindful way. So I appreciate you bringing that up, that like really these are things that are real world accessible. People have this access to an intelligence proving machine. It's a protocol for work, and it's already available now. There's so many products already offered that are currently have customers that are operating.
Yeah. And we're starting to get attention from some, pretty major players in the tech world in general. Like we see Jason Calacanis, who's partnered up with a couple of their folks like Mark Jeffrey on Stillcore Capital. They're shouting Tao from the rooftops. I think that's driving a lot of people in to just be like, hey, what is this project? Is it all that? And it is. And I think that we're going to see more of those kinds of thought leaders and kind of early opinion leaders in this space, which is just amazing. But I think also there's another side of attraction that's coming in. It's not just the investor side. It's not just the customer side, but it's the subnet builder side. And we're bringing in startups that are thinking about, hey, I have a problem that I need to solve. Is it worth my time and effort to build a subnet? So you guys have supported a handful of subnet projects, to say the least. You also have some expertise with the mining and validating side. So Yuma has like experience with every angle to the subnet lifecycle: mining, validating, building, investing, like literally start to finish every single part of the subnet lifecycle. So could you kind of break down, in your view, like what are the benefits of building a subnet 2026? Like if you're a startup company, why explore building a subnet? What are the benefits? What does a subnet do that is different than a traditional startup? And what does it bring you that you just really would struggle to do through other means?
And I think there's several aspects to that. It's a challenging question. It's a big question. But I will say that some things that come to mind readily is that decentralization, it lowers the barrier of entry to these types of services. Like if you were to go and try to get these services from other companies, they might say it's a low barrier of entry, but they're usually high cost or high implementation requirements. This just opens that access. So if a new startup is like, hey, I just want to try this out to see if my proof of concept even works, you can scale up and you can scale out, and you can do that. And it's very easy to do. Some services that are traditionally built can do that, but decentralized is just really built for this open access. It's very quick. Like I was saying earlier, it's the intelligence proving machine. It's like, how do you want to connect your requirement into that? Well, it's open permissionless access. You don't even have to have a business to come do it. You just have to have the asset to be able to come in and buy the token and participate, which is just great. And I think also it opens up access to talent. I think it's undersold like so much. Look at
Mhm.
what like CrunchDAO did recently with like, hey, we're going to allow people to come mine. They like built an interface to kind of obfuscate some of the Bittensor layers that people maybe weren't familiar with, but they had this ML expertise, and they kind of focus more, I think, on inference and a couple other adjacent like subnet types, and they kind of break those out of like these are the ones we think we're going to target. But they brought this global pool of talent that they knew and said, "Hey, we can come bring this to bear on Bittensor and make it accessible in a different way for people who don't necessarily want to, use the current tools to do that." And I think those interfaces to the ecosystem are great because it just means more researchers, more machine learning specialists, more technologists that can come in, maybe even more hardware, and this infrastructure piece that we're talking about can come in. So when you want to build a subnet here, all of a sudden it's like, hey, I really can't afford the best talent in the world to have on my staff. It's like, well, actually you can, because you can come here, make an incentive mechanism, and then the best talent in the world, we have all this talent that comes in and competes. Because it's not just that they come to the network, it's that they actually then have to compete against others to improve whatever problem that you're trying to solve. So that's a huge asset for a subnet or for a startup that comes in, is to be able to like just really have this open avenue of talent. Because finding talent, it takes months sometimes to go and hire somebody and shop that around. But we've had people who have left their jobs to come mine on Bittensor because they can use their expertise on 7 different problems that they're excellent at. And whole mining teams have formed to be like, hey, we're going to approach this problem together and go mine subnets together. So like, I think that just having that decentralization be a low barrier of entry
Mhm.
to the services, but also this low barrier of entry to talent. You don't have to fill out a bunch of tax forms and stuff. They have to handle that on their own. You don't even necessarily know who they are. Your incentive mechanism and the validators just prove out the work that's being done as quality. I think that's super huge.
I think that's key. I think that there's, yeah, like you said, like there's this two-sided coin of, hey, if I'm a builder and I'm an engineer, I'm a researcher, I'm a fill in the blank, I have permissionless access to any number of projects that I can help and contribute to. But then also, if I'm a startup company and I need access to talent, the subnet brings it to me in a couple of ways. There's maybe the more obvious one, that is the funding. Whereas if I don't have the budget to support an entire research team, but I can spin up a subnet, now I have access to up to 250 plus miners who can compete on my project. And that in and of itself is a huge win. But there's also the side of organization as well, where the subnet naturally becomes a competition where everybody is competing with each other to be the best at whatever that problem is. And obviously, there's a little bit of an art to incentive mechanism design. Um, as anyone
Little
who's,
art, little science.
yeah, little art, little science, as anyone who's familiar with Bittensor knows, that minor exploitation is in a permissionless world that we live in is real, and it can be a challenge. But once you solve that and you get a robust mechanism that is really difficult to work around, you don't just hire really talented individuals for no cost to you. You end up organizing them in a
Yeah.
way where you sift through the noise and you get the best of the best players that are working on your project. And I remember like in my very first job in this field in software engineering, we had this little, I forgot what even the project was, but it was like a little software project that wasn't really worth hiring an entire person for that specific like expertise. But it was something none of us on the team knew how to do. So our CTO actually hosted a competition that said like, hey, the first person that can do this. It was I can't remember the website, but it was basically like an Upwork or Fiverr or something like that. It was like a competition. It was like, hey, we're going to be accepting anyone that can take a crack at solving this given problem or a prototype for that, and the winner takes the prize. And we ended up getting like 50 plus submissions, and we paid for essentially what it would have cost for one of them to build something. So that's like a super fast tracked interview process of, hey, you just pick your favorite one. You had 50 submissions, but you didn't pay for 50 submissions. You paid for the winner. And a Bittensor kind of naturally works that way. And it kind of works things out so that, miners that do a pretty decent job can still get paid something. Miners do a great job, get paid a lot more. Miners that don't do a very good job at all get paid nothing.
And
And
maybe get removed from the network They can come back
maybe a good
in.
move.
They can come back in, but that's that competition element that encourages people to really
Yeah.
strive to do good work.
Right. So Subnet kind of naturally structures this competition. And so it draws people in, it draws talent in, but it also directs that talent through this funnel, which is, and through this filter mechanism, which is the open like meritocracy of the subnet. And I think through those two benefits, the funding side of things of I have access to talent I didn't previously have the ability to have access to because of funding constraint, networking constraints, whatever, or the organization side of things, which is now maybe I have access to that talent, but I have no idea how to filter through that talent to find what I'm looking for. I don't know how to incentivize maybe the best talent to produce the best work. Now I've got that in a subnet, and all of a sudden, as a startup company, I'm solving problems at a much faster rate than I'm used to.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I
and
mean,
something to that, Garrett, back to that, I think that incentive layer piece it answers part of your question, I think, is a traditional startup would have like really big issues pitching like blockchain or crypto, right? There's like this either lack of understanding or they don't necessarily, they aren't familiar with it from their investment side. But almost everyone is compelled by incentive power. And that's a very compelling story back to the 200, 250 engineers or whatever. That's a very compelling story to be like, hey, we have this group of people that are incentivized. It's a community solely focused on solving this problem with us. And we can organize them. That incentive layer is so huge. Because I've talked to so many people. I went to NeurIPS this year and I talked to people about, if I started off with it's a blockchain and crypto and I go into the rest of the spiel, it's like glaze over because that person's there to talk about ML, right? But then if I say, like there was a gentleman, he was actually working on he was cataloging insects, particularly moths. I thought it was fascinating. But I was like, what would you do if you had 200 engineers working on this? That got his attention, because it was like, oh, that'd be really interesting because I would do this and this and this, start to solve the problem. Like everybody understands that. If you can like take that resourcing problem and focus it, I think it really helps startups when it comes to investment to say, this is how we're going to actually staff and tackle the problem. And that people understand that.
Yeah, I love it when crypto and blockchain is used like as a means to an end for a purpose. And that sounds obvious to say, but there are so many projects where I feel like it's a crypto project because it's a crypto project.
Yeah.
And Bittensor is something where it's a crypto project because that's the best way to organize this incentive mechanism. And like it's the best way to track this. And so it's like the chain is a means to an end to assemble this ecosystem and this kind of social group of builders, engineers, researchers, startup founders, investors, all together in this kind of orchestra of innovation.
To the point where the chain tooling is coming forward and it's like getting more mature and accessible all the time. But people are also building their own tooling on top of the chain to make it accessible for the specific ways that they need. And it's fascinating to watch this thing grow.
Yeah, totally. And so along those lines, we're seeing a lot of ecosystem changes that have been brought to bear up to this point. I mean, Paul, you and I are very familiar with the kind of the evolution of the chain over time. We were brought in like late 2023, early 2024. It's now 2026. We are a couple of years into this. Things have changed a lot. We have DTAO, we have TaoFlow, we have Mev Shield, we have all these things. There's been a lot of ecosystem and protocol changes, and you and I are both in protocol heavy roles where we're actively thinking about this on a daily basis.
Sometimes in my sleep.
Yeah. What would you say, like, how would you summarize maybe the last, few months of the protocol, and where do we need to go in 2026? And what are the things that maybe you're most excited about? What are the things maybe you're still questioning, or maybe you have some concerns about? And yeah, I just love to pick your brain a little bit on the state of things. On this podcast, we talk about a lot of protocol changes. We talk about TaoFlow, we talk about Mev Shield, we talk about subnet governance, we talk about all kinds of these kind of forefront issues or topics in Bittensor to make things better, to fulfill this kind of grand vision that we just went over for the last 40 minutes or so. That is already happening and is being assembled. But now that we can get a boots on the ground perspective other than my own, and Keith's, what's your take on kind of where things are at, and then we can dive into a couple of specifics and drill
I,
those
I
down.
think you summarized a lot of it. I think let's go back to something you said a minute ago. You were talking about the earlier days of when we kind of came in. That was a scaling point of the ecosystem. So I'll say, even though that's a past statement, it was veracity. Like the veracity of the network has never really been gone. It's the veracity has been there this entire time. Because at that time, and this is relevant to now, at that time, it was one subnet in October, 2023 or whatever. And then they were like, hey, we're going to open it up to 32. Well, then it was like instantly 32. It went from, hey, the floodgates are open, 32. And then as soon as it hit 64, bam, it scales up to 64, scales up to, every time we've scaled, it just keeps filling up. And with obviously the degree of quality from hero to zero, and everybody's experimenting and figuring this out. And some people are running, hardcore businesses, and some people are still doing research. That's the way it was always supposed to be, is it's a gamut of businesses. But that veracity has never left. It's always been here and present. And sometimes we forget that. But that scaling out has put pressure on those areas where, now, chatting in online forums or on PRs, pull requests of code in GitHub, like that's a harder place to like organize those thoughts. And we're being much more active in our open calls and discussions and focusing those things. So I think the next steps, you mentioned governance, that's a huge piece of it, where the chain used to be managed much more by people who were called root validators, and like emissions were kind of decided through a more of a high cabal of people with deep investment and people who had delegated to them. And it was supposed to be representational, but we knew it wasn't the final form. At that stage of veracity, it was good, but now the veracity is even more so, and it's scaled out. And there's people really eager to get in, and people are selling their subnet slots. When they're done, they'll sell it to someone else, and another person immediately comes in. These things don't sit around, and I think that veracity is good. But the governance now has come into, well, we need to make sure the builders are included, right? So now the next version of governance is talking about, hey, we'll have the people who are managing the core progress of the chain, but also we'll have proposals that both the people who validate the AI work and the people who are building the AI problems will be able together to decide, is this the future of the chain? That's part of that scale out, to manage the veracity of who's coming to the ecosystem as it scaled out so fast. And then also, I think we call it NPOS, but the proof of stake, the ability to have the chain be decentralized. It's not currently fully decentralized, but it's actively being worked on. That is a huge goal. Const himself, and all that were on a call recently, where Const announced, he was stepping out of the limelight of CEO, by him saying, look, I'm still going to be in the ecosystem, but we really need to hand this off to the community. Now, I posted on X something that Alla Shabana had said was fantastic, of just like, this is what we need for, I think, he didn't say veracity, but it's like, this is the next stage of the network. To handle what's going to come, it has to be out into the community, which means we need the right governance, and we need the chain to actually be fully decentralized. And so they're actively building those out. And James Steves, he called those out in the call, that's what we need, is the chain decentralization feature is in the works, complete with the transaction MEV protection stuff that they're working on, which is fantastic. And then the subnet governance. I think those two pieces together are really the next like springboard point of the network, really kind of becoming this open operating system of intelligence generation, which is just really exciting. And then back to the report, the State of Bittensor report, watching that percentage of the network, that really the value being driven by the subnets, it's just indicative of what you said earlier, of like, we're seeing this value generation from the subnets, and it's represented in how much of that cap of the market is really contained in these subnets, which is fantastic. So that's what I see. I think decentralization of the chain, from what we call proof of authority, where it's more centralized, to proof of stake, where it's decentralized. Great work going on there. And then that second piece is the subnet governance, where it's representational more broadly in the eco. I think are going to be really, really powerful. There's some aspects to that, like we've talked about, like how authoritative are we when it comes to our influence in the network? Like,
Yeah.
do we want to be like financially focused, or when do we like have hard stops that are less about democratic voting and more like, this is bad for the chain? There's like balances to find there. That's really hard, because we've talked before, like, what if a terrible a subnet's producing terrible content, but nobody wants on the network. Do we let the economics remove them or do we formally remove them? There's still some governance questions about how we approach those things, and maybe it's not an either or scenario. So there's still some questions there, but I think those are the two big ones: is the governance and the distributed chain.
Yeah, there's a couple of points there I want to double click on there. So first with NPOS, nominate proof of stake, we're decentralizing the chain. Previously, and up to this point, the Open Tensor Foundation had been running all the chain validator nodes. And now we're decentralizing. I think this is a move to really take the ecosystem to a point where it's an organism in and of itself. It's not a project anymore. It's a living thing, because it is in and of itself unkillable because of how many other participants there are in actually maintaining the chain, which is really important. And I think that's on a broader level, that is the maturity of Bittensor coming to fruition. Because previously it was like, okay, Bittensor itself, if you think of Bittensor itself like a startup company, it needs special attention, it needs handholding, it needs that founder energy type of effort being put into it. And that's where I think we all can appreciate what Jake and Alla have done with Bittensor up to this point and getting it across the finish line towards this area where we have this massive influx of people. We have tens of thousands of people involved in the ecosystem. We have 128 subnets all working on a wide array of projects. And Bittensor is by far and away the most successful and like the most attention-grabbing ecosystem that's related to the intersection of AI and crypto. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's been needed. And it just like before DTAO, we had the root network. You mentioned the root validator network that would basically decide the winners and losers of the subnets, where they would vote on how much tau emission each subnet should get, which seems like really simple compared to our current system that we have that's market-driven now. But we could not have started with a market-driven mechanism, I don't think. I don't think we could have started Bittensor on day one with DTAO. I think you had to scale to that. You start with the one subnet, like you mentioned, in like pre-October 2023, you had one subnet. Then you moved to 32. Then you move a little bit more. Then you move to 48, you move to 64. Then you do DTAO. Then you move to 128. This is a progression. And I think that up to this point, the chain itself has also been needed to be operating by the Open Tensor Foundation, because there's a lot of benefits to having it centralized. There's faster development, faster deployments, et cetera. And that's been very much needed to do this kind of rapid development, rapid improvement that Bittensor's undergone over the last couple of years that you and I have been a part of. And now we're getting to a point where it's like, okay, we're seeing a lot of attention. We're seeing a lot of people that are building. We're seeing a lot of like outside interest. Let's make sure that we're preparing for scale. Let's make sure that we're maturing to a point where Bittensor itself grows to this maturity where maybe the kind of startup building cycle slows down, but the scalability of Bittensor just increases massively. Where like right now we have 128 subnets and we're like, man, is this too many subnets? Is this showing enough value? I think we're going to get to a point where we have thousands of subnets and we're like, man, how did we ever make do with 128? It's like it's the internet of startups. It's the internet of AI. It's like, how many websites should there be in the internet? Like, this is such a silly question. And are there good quality subnets and bad quality subnets? There's always going to be good subnets and bad subnets, just like there's good websites and bad websites. But we need Bittensor to be scalable. And in order to do that, it needs to be robust. It needs to be a mechanism that works with 2 subnets, 20 subnets, 200 subnets, 2,000 subnets.
Well, and there's a hard balance to strike in that, like, coming from, you and I both come from security background from, a former company we work with. And there's always a balance in security. It's ease of use versus security, right? It's the TSA. I just want to get on a plane, but the TSA needs to check me. And there's always this balance in friction. And in AI, it's, it's authority or it's autonomy and access, right? how much access do I get it? How much autonomy do I give it? That's how much damage it can do. Like in these things, we're trying to find these balances so that the ecosystem can be successful, right? We want the token holders to have a say. We want the builders. We want the economics to have a say. Like, how do we find that balance? And I think every iteration that you're talking about has been really driving towards this goal of finding more and more balance over time, which has been really, really fascinating to watch. I totally agree with what you're saying.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing I want to drill into that you mentioned is the subnet governance piece of how much influence should there be from the financial levers and how much like more authoritative or executive or judicial levers there should be.
Right.
And this is actually a widespread debate in the ecosystem and in the community, is that there's one camp that would say the market determines the winners and losers, and we should respect that, and we should allow the market to do that as much as possible. There's another side that would say that regardless of market action, some things just need to be regulated. And it's possible that even the market will not have the ability to react either as fast or as consequentially as is needed to regulate a subnet, either by deleting it entirely or capping its emissions or doing something of that nature that might be needed, whether it be illegal content, exploitative content, extractive content that is like maybe unknown to the market, where you say, okay, well, we as hardware validating teams and subnet building teams, investor teams, we could evaluate a subnet. We could say, hey, this is really extractive. This is funneling funds completely away from miners, completely away from everybody, and it's just going straight into the owner's coffers, or maybe some other kind of exploit where the miners are heavily exploiting this. And we can say, hey, the subnet is not viable and it's bleeding the ecosystem, and we need to do something about it. Are we going to wait for the market to respond to that? Does the market even know about that? So that's always been the argument for why executive or authoritative action is needed. Does the flip side of that, though, is that like, well, hey, if there's authoritative action being done, then you do have a council of people, however big that council is, that's just determining who wins and loses. And that corrupts the market, who is really supposed to be the decider of this. And so I suspect we'll find some middle ground, probably not a 50-50 middle ground. It'll probably be leaning more one way than the other. I am really curious about the financial levers that can be implemented to kind of bring the market more governing power. And we say governing power, like that sounds like as if it's this, like we're going to elect people to office or something. But a lot of times governing power can come in the form of investments. It can come in the form of, placing, bets against or for a subnet, in the form of shorting or longing or something like that. I'm curious where that's going to come from. There's currently a few kind of things in the works that are exploring those kind of extra financial tooling and whatnot that can help the market regulate subnets. I think that's interesting. I think that there's a lot to cook on there, and so I'm gonna kind of wait and see a little bit.
Well, here's a thought on that. I think with Yuma having hands in many things, spinning a lot of plates in the ecosystem, we could have a very subjective opinion on each of those. Like from each of those, you could say mining has its opinion, validation has its opinion, subnet accelerator, we could have 10 different opinions inside of 10 different subnets. And then Yuma asset management itself, it's an investment arm, so it's going to be very economic focused. But like thinking agnostically, like backing up, like I've had to kind of go back and forth a little bit on that myself. And there's the subjectivity that gets inserted, and that's that dangerous part. And I think you've highlighted that of like, we don't want to be subjective where people are afraid that, hey, if I bring this to the ecosystem, I could be swatted out, And I think there's this balance is being brought to where like, no, we really need to favor the economics, the protocol itself, and the holders need to be able to determine the fate of something on the network. And I think the exceptions, yes, I think there are exceptions where there's something like is actually harmful. There's a network exploit. It's content that everyone agrees doesn't need to be on the network. That could be subjective at times, but I think there's a baseline that we all can agree on that nobody wants to be there. And some of those things may get to a vote where the ecosystem does vote on, like we think that's actually harmful to all of our businesses for that to be here, and we can vote that out. I think we'll find that balance I don't know that it will be perfect the first time, and it may even adjust over time based on the community voting on that. That's right. I'm more, the more that I've thought on this, and the more I've been involved with Yuma and talking with you and talking with Open Tensor developers, talking with subnet owners, and just getting those different perspectives, and miners too. I really have erred more lately on the side of the economics engine as much as we can, because the protocol's been very actually successful in a lot of ways at dynamically dealing with situations. TaoFlow is a dynamic system. The AMMs, the market, the managers that handle the transition of Tau into subnet tokens for every subnet is dynamic in how it handles things. The pricing of transactions can be dynamic. There's lots of things that are dynamics. We just want to make sure that as we add features to the chain, that those dynamics don't interfere with each other in ways that can be, more harmful. And so I think the dynamics have shown that we can recreate dynamic systems that can be responsive. And I would say from an asset management perspective, that if you invest in anything in the real world, there are times where something based on word of mouth, it gets hyped. There's lots of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or FUD, as everybody says. There's fear of missing out, the FOMO. Like there's that sentiment is out there, and it will cause people to congregate around something temporarily that isn't good. But you have to allow time for the network to respond to that and reject it. And some of that will come by word of mouth of like, oh, now we all understand what this really is. It wasn't what it said initially. We all agree now. Let's get it out. And that's where we have to go. Has it gotten to the point where the network can no longer functionally reject it by the economics? Then you go, okay, that might be a measurable stage where we go, hey, this has actually become a vulnerability of the network, and we need to approach that. So I think we really need to err on the side of the economics and really reserve those other times for extremes. Or maybe it needs to be, oh, we see how that got exercised and how it became this unbeatable monster that the network can no longer reject. Let's make a change to the change so the dynamics can affect that. Not let's make a change to the change just to boot them out. And I really want to err on the side of the economics, I think, and that's the challenge.
I think that's a very mature way to think about things, and I think that's something I look forward to just understanding more of myself and diving into more.
Yeah.
But Paul, thanks for joining on this pod. This has been really, I think it's just a fun kind of exploration of a few different topics. It's great to have you on board and to just chit chat about the state of Bittensor, kind of getting a little bit of a lens into the Yuma perspective, but also just your own personal perspective on things. So thanks for coming on board.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I would say last things for me would just be definitely check out yumaai.com. You can see the subnets we're accelerating there and kind of learn more about us. Check us out at Yuma Group on X. You can actually see the State of Bittensor report there. Highly recommend going through it. If you have any questions, DM me at Swamination on Discord. Just know Yuma is there just to be like a premier on-ramp to Bittensor. We just want to see Bittensor succeed, and I'm a support to anybody in the community. If you have questions, trying to figure something out, you're a builder, you're a miner, let me know. I can help.
Absolutely. Yeah, guys, follow them on social media. Check out their State of Bittensor Volume 2 report. Follow us on X as well, Tao.com. Download the Tao.com app. Explore some of the subnets on the app that Yuma has been supporting. But yeah, guys, this has been good. Paul, this has been good. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you guys next time on the next Carrot the Stick episode. Take care, everyone.